Andy Johnson. This is a series of mini lectures looking at racism in special education. In this one, I'm hoping to define or come to some understanding of what racism is. You can pause and read the disclaimer there when I mentioned the special education silo. As well, disclaimers, I am a white man, always have been. I can never know what it's like to be a person of color. I'm not an expert in this area. I'm simply describing the literature, what I have found. I'm addressing this issue as a scholar. I'm not leading the conversation. I don't want to, but I am using my small voice to address one part of this conversation. If you want to see some of the sources that I used, you can go to the website there and see some of the sources I used for this series of videos looking at racism in special education. Let's define our terms. You can pause and read that, but the thing is, it is structural, political, economic forces that discriminate and disadvantage and maintain power for the people in power. Another definition by Ibram X. Kendi: racist policies and ideas that normalize racism and inequities and inequalities. Oh, it's normal. So you don't even see it after a while. It's the policies, the laws, the guidelines, the rules, both written and unwritten, that keep some people in power and other people from not having power. It is institutional, structural, and systemic. It occurs in systems. The greater system is made up of interacting systems, educational system, economic, social, judicial, political systems, all in place to disadvantage and marginalize people of color, to keep in power the majority, to disadvantage others based on geography, social economic status, as well as race. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Racism is different from racist acts. Racism festers or creates the condition where racist acts can occur, but racism is like a bit of poison in the water tank. You can't drink a single cup without it being tainted. Racist acts are specific, one or more people, directed against one or more people, by one or more people, on the basis of race. These are racist acts. This is racism. These are racist acts. What systems allow this virus to fester and occur? I don't see racism, you say. That may be, but your brain does, implicit racism, and our policies, our laws, our guidelines, our systems, our educational system sees race and racism. It is not colorblind. You can be non-racist, that means you just don't do it. Or you can be anti-racist, that means you speak up, you try to do something, you say something. You are against any oppression, any suppression, any taking advantage or silencing of any minority or traditional group. It could be based on religion, it could be based on sex and gender, sexual orientation. The apple theory. The apple theory says, oh, racism is just a few bad apples. This is an erroneous idea. It deflects responsibility by those in power. It's not the system, it's just a few bad people, they say. Get rid of those apples, those bad apples, and we will be rid of racism. Well, we've had bad apples for years and years and years and years, and racism still exists as a virus. Racism are the policies, the laws, the regulations that divert or hoard resources and opportunities for some groups. The policies, laws, programs, guidelines that enable some schools to get more, others to get fewer resources, some communities more, others fewer. Healthcare systems, more and fewer. Better jobs for some communities, for some people, others not so much. Housing, Some communities get more, have affordable housing, others not. It's not a level playing field. I remember I was observing student teachers one day, and I was in downtown St. Paul, inner city, third grade classroom. And on the same day, I went to a third grade classroom in Apple Valley, Minnesota. Like living on two different planets. This idea of a level playing field and meritocracy, and everyone can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Well, if you don't have boots in the first place, it's hard to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Systemic racism, differences in housing opportunities. It's systemic, it's institutional, it's interpersonal, and it's internalized. And here are all the different systems this virus affects. Racism also involves silencing voices. So a single voice or point of view dominates the conversations. Decisions are made about people without some people. Voter suppression is one way that voices are silenced. Silence is complicity. Oh, American history books, textbooks, traditional, in quotes, American history. Some stories are told, others are not. Some point of views are expressed, others are not. The voice of the majority get told. And there's an awful lot of white people, especially white men, in our history books. The micros of racism, smaller bits of bigotry, discrimination, slurs, abuses, suppression, or aggression, usually based on race, heritage, ethnicity, subtle, occurs over time, implicit, constant, tends to put down and disregard. Let's take a look at what these micros are. There's microaggression, brief verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, directed, subtle slights. They could be intentional or unintentional, conscious or unconscious, used against members of marginalized groups. Micro-invalidation, verbal comments that tend to negate or nullify or demean the psychological thoughts, the ideas, the behaviors, the experienced reality. Oh, you're being overly sensitive. You shouldn't feel like that way. You don't know. Research shows only our controlled experimental studies can give us truth. Your point doesn't matter. We know better. That's micro-invalidation. It occurs both explicitly and implicitly. And micro-insults, subtle, negative, demeaning comments related to racial heritage or ethnicity. Oh, you got that job only because of affirmative action. You have a disability. That's the only reason why. Oh, you're one of those people. These micros don't rise to the level where an HR office or a Title IX office can do anything, but over time they create a toxic and hostile environment in which to live, in which to work, in which to go to school. And the micro assaults then, there's insults and assaults, are explicit and intended to be derogatory. Actions or avoidance behavior, scheduling meetings and not including somebody, comments specifically intended to demean, forms of harassment, spreading untruths about something. And again, it doesn't rise to the overt, outright bigotry, harassment, and racism, that Title IX or HR, but over time they create this toxic environment. Here are some examples of this. You're pretty for a black girl. These are all things that students have written. You're not really black. You dress nice for a black girl. Do you play basketball so you dive? Can you swim? You don't speak Spanish? No. Where are you really from? You don't act like a normal black person, you know. You're not really Asian. When people think it's weird that I listen to Carrie Underwood, that's a good one. That's my favorite one. All right, parochialism and cultural superiority is one of the elements in the petri dish that enables this virus to grow. Parochialism is narrow-mindedness, focusing or valuing only one's own interest, point of view, or opinion. You see the world only from your perspective, and that's the correct one. You can't imagine another way of seeing or thinking or being. Parochialism. Cultural superiority is when the values and customs of the majority are used as the standard. This is what normal is. All others are compared to this idea of what you think is normal. This reifies racism. The majority culture, which in most cases is white, middle class, Eurocentric, and largely Christian, these are the right groups. Everyone should be like us. It's a standard. If only they were like us, they should have our values, our way of seeing. They should have matching furniture. Of course. Of course. Cultural assimilation is a form of this. It's the idea of a melting pot. If they were just like us, they should leave their culture behind. They should assimilate. They should be like us. Versus cultural pluralism, the values. It values and celebrates all cultures. We don't tolerate diversity, we celebrate diversity. We accept, we listen to differences. We are open to new ideas. We recognize that our values may not be other people's values. We're open to new ideas that enable us to evolve. Differences make us better, make us stronger, and we celebrate each person's uniqueness.